Welcome back to Timeless Mindset. In this episode, we are joined by Elizabeth Knight, founder of Purposeful, a business that has run for over 5 years and helps you navigate yourself to find a career that is fulfilling. Expect to learn about how to use an anti-job to create your dream job, how to maximize fulfillment in your career, why introspection and self-awareness needs to be improved, why passion is overrated, why most decisions are reversible, how to build the inner toolkit along the way, and so much more. It was such a great conversation that explored why it is so important to tackle these problems and try and figure out yourself along the way. It's not easy, and I'm still managing and overcoming a lot of these things, but it's necessary and it's so important and rewarding as well. But before we start, this podcast of mine is a major passion, and I love sharing these stories and ideas, but I also do like seeing the 5-star ratings increase. It does show the impact is growing, and it makes me happy. So if you could press the 3 dots in the profile and click rate show, it would definitely mean a lot to me. Thank you. Let's begin. Elizabeth Knight, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so stoked to be here.
So before we get into the 7 things you need to know before starting your job and your career, let's get a little bit into your story and I guess how you're here talking about these things.
Yeah, so I am the founder of Purposeful. So when I was 19 years old, I had done really well, I guess, in our traditional education system, like had the shiny high ATAR, could choose from a lot of different things for my own career. But after year 11 and 12, I was really burnt out physically, mentally, the whole bit. And I was introduced to this idea of like entrepreneurship, and you don't actually just have to choose a career, but you could be a part of creating your own career too. And I really loved that. It always appealed to me. So when I was 19, I decided to, start Purposeful, which is my business, and work towards over that sort of first 2 to 3 years, making that my full-time job. So we ran programs and workshops in high schools and also uni, TAFE, like the whole bit, to help young people figure out what they want to do, what you're passionate about, and how to turn that into a career pathway.
Have you seen like thousands of years ago, or maybe not that long ago, people used to work and their job wasn't disconnected from who they were. So everyone was sort of like entrepreneur. It's like everyone used to be entrepreneurs, and then the Industrial Revolution came along, and then there became that separation between work and leisure outside of work.
Yeah.
Have you seen like the history of the workplace? It's quite interesting.
I feel like you need to give me some book recommendations after this on that potentially. Yeah, it's such a relevant point today. There's a lot of research on this about with our generation, we obviously like really value passion and having that as part of our career. Like I think passion after, money is like literally 84% of young people want to be passionate about the career that they do, which is really different to say like our parents' generation. But I think we also see now that, we spend so much time at work, but your work self is like separate to your real self or your like personal self. We want those two things to be combined more at the same time. I think there's a lot going on there that young people are struggling with now.
So I want to know for you personally, like when you're a high achiever and you're doing well, it's sort of the expectation that you're going to either be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. It's only the people who sort of struggle to get good grades where the conversations start happening around like, okay, what are you going to do? Like clearly the academic pathway isn't for you. So I want to know how you sort of dealt with that pressure to like go into a traditional pathway and sort of how you evolved into Purposeful.
Yeah, I always like to talk about expectations because what I've seen over the last few years is that young people either have too many expectations on them, and maybe that was for me. I kind of felt this pressure to have like the world on my shoulders all the time. Like I needed to do something that was worthy of being like a nerdy, smart kid at school. I felt like I had to go into something like law or medicine because I could, and there was a lot of pressure to follow that path. I don't think anyone explicitly said you have to do this, but everybody around me was doing it. So it did mean I would have had to go against the grain. On the other hand, like a lot of young people maybe have no expectations on them, right, too, that people don't think that they're good enough to be able to do different pathways. And I think the weight of either having lots of expectations or people not expecting you to make it or amount to much, like both of those things can be really difficult in the same kind of way. So for me, when I was at uni, I was on track to do law, and whilst my family were supportive of me, they really wanted me to have that job security that maybe they didn't have. And so when I realized that I wasn't going to go down that path, it was really difficult. I had to work with them to actually prove that I was serious about what I was doing. When I was at uni, I also applied for a job in consulting, which is like a really traditional kind of industry too. And I actually applied for this scholarship, and it was like you got a job with the scholarship essentially. Applied for it, didn't think anything of it. Ended up getting this scholarship out of like everybody in Australia that had applied for it, and had this amazing full-time job, this job security. And so my parents were like, great, you're set at 21, you've got this pathway set out. And I ended up not doing it. I ended up like rejecting it and going full-time on my business, which was not making that much money at that point. So it's taken a long time to get to a position where, one, I'm making like a full-time income and very, decent money from what I'm doing, but actually just investing. I think that the biggest change for my family was seeing that I am going to put in the work to actually pursue this path and make it a reality. Time has helped in that sense. Yeah.
What was the turning point internally for was there a sense of intuition, or what sort of signals within sort of prompted you to make that shift?
Yeah, I when I was 19, I was just driving from when I was 19, I was motivated by like pure raw passion. I didn't think that failing was an option because I was 19 and just like really confident about what I saw as being, this really broken space in education, and my ideas, I really believed in them. I think when you then start getting out there into the world, especially in education, that was a big challenge for a lot of teachers and career advisors that we were talking to, because I was a 20-year-old without any career experience behind me saying, I think that I can do this better. And they'd kind of look at you and go like, yeah, sure, but probably not. It started fueling a lot of imposter syndrome for me once I started actually getting into the education space and working with teachers. So for the first couple of years, I then really was quite rattled, I guess, from the imposter syndrome side of things. And it wasn't until I really started seeing the impact come through from my team members, for example. We had one team member who ended up quitting her pathway in medicine that she'd gone down based off of like listening to our podcast. She came onto the podcast, shared her story, had been studying medicine for about 7 years, and then after that, ended up pursuing a totally different pathway. One of our team members a few years later had been inspired by hearing her story, and much earlier in his journey changed his path. He was like on track to become a doctor and realized much earlier that it wasn't for him. And just seeing that impact actually happen and take effect and going, wow, we are genuinely having a big influence on young people and helping them. Like that has always been the source of continuous motivation for me. Then it comes back to you, I think, in weird and wonderful ways sometimes, but always being open to that has really helped to reaffirm that this is still the right decision for me.
I saw a really cool perspective on imposter syndrome that you might like, and it was basically like imposter syndrome is like the price you have to pay for doing something meaningful because it's so outside your comfort zone. There's not proof that you have that you're capable. It's like me doing a podcast giving life advice when I'm 22 to other people. Yeah. It's the same thing as you going to schools. But when you look back at history and all these historical figures, it was those people who stood up against the grain. It was those people who took a risk, were courageous enough for years and years to put their beliefs into the world that had the biggest impact. If you look back at history, there's so many individuals whose legacy wasn't realized until after they were gone. It takes a lot of courage for that, to go through that uncertainty, to not have that validation from other people, to stand up for what you believe in. And I think the more I bring myself back to that, the more empowered I feel. but it's so hard when we're so conditioned to do what other people expect of us.
I think when you care about making a difference, you also really care that you are having that impact. So it means that you can become more doubtful of yourself. I always think about the quote that I heard at like a leadership conference once, which was this idea of how far are you willing to go alone? And that always really sticks with me when I'm going through a tough time or I'm feeling like I'm doubting, the direction and decisions that I've made. And how far are you willing to actually invest without seeing any return on what you're doing? Keeping in mind that, as you say, that impact might not come for years or decades later. I also think that a big turning point for me was just realizing that other people are bullshitting a lot of the time too, especially in the startup space. Like, there's a lot of pressure in startups. Investors will ask you, what's your 100-year vision for this company, or how are you going to 100x your returns from your business? So like 100 times what you're making right now. Like, that is just a crazy question to ask, and it's designed to challenge you, obviously. But anybody that's answering that, their answer is going to be wrong, right? Like 9 times out of 10, you can't answer that and know for sure what your impact is going to be in 100 years, or how you're going to get from having made $0 to hundreds of millions of dollars. And once I kind of realized that it was a bit of a game in itself, it really took the pressure off for me, I think, and helped me to be confident in yes, this is a big vision I'm working towards, but also we are doing good right now, and it is having an impact. And I use that, and that kind of helps ground me a bit.
If we can't connect the dots to see where our action's going to take us when we take that leap of faith, how do we sort of embrace the discomfort of that uncertainty? How do we manage these uncharted waters to get to places we want to go, but we sort of don't know how to get there? And sometimes there's not actually perfect guidance on how to get there, because for a lot of people doing their own thing in their own life, it's pretty unique and personalized. And I guess sometimes we outsource answers. We're looking for wholesale answers from people, but sometimes we have to figure it out ourselves, and I think that's the scary thing.
That absolutely, looking at the blank page, and that's why I think most people will go into a traditional pathway, right, for their careers, because you get that confidence and certainty of knowing, okay, I'm going to go to TAFE, I'm going to go to uni, I'm going to study for this many years, then I'm going to get a job. We like certainty. So I think realizing that path is not necessarily more certain than any other path as well has over time helped me, especially nowadays. We're going to talk more about values, I think, soon too, but a big part of making good decisions for me is about making decisions that are aligned with your core values, that using them really as your compass, and knowing I can really confidently make any decision in my life and know I'm not going to regret it, in terms of it's not going to go against who I am authentically as a person. It's going to be something that is going to ultimately fulfill me, even if it might have other consequences that I haven't thought about. But I'm going to be fulfilled and aligned by making decisions that match my core values. So that really helps me to be confident about the choices that I make, especially when, the other outcomes can be uncertain. I think, especially when you're going into uncharted territory, there's always the stable pathway, right, to fall back on at the end of the day. You can always go back and study. You can always go back and get a traditional job. But when you're young in particular, you have less risk associated with trying something that's new and that, maybe nobody has done before, or might be considered more risky, because you've got less risk. When you're 18 or 19, it's very different to when you're, say, in your 40s, and you've got other people potentially depending on you, you're taking on a caring role, all of those kind of things. You probably don't have that at 18 as much. So, yeah.
I also think there's an invisible cost that we're too scared to look at, which is the regret, which slowly builds up. And I feel like for most people, there's sort of that authentic voice, slowly screaming out, but either one, we numb it, we're very good at doing that, or we're really good at creating a story that aligns to that safety. Yep. So the brain is a regret minimizer. We don't want to live with regret. And because of cognitive dissonance, we manufacture a story that makes us feel like we're doing the right thing. But I think in the long run, time provides a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. You have to have enough courage to be like, to examine yourself, examine your choices. And I think the hardest thing people face is this whole concept of putting time into something and then like realizing that it was for nothing.
Yeah.
That whole sunk cost fallacy.
I can definitely talk about that because so I have been doing this for like 5-6 years now, right? I haven't had a proper job ever so far. But the ways that this path has paid off, like it just in ways that I just could never have predicted. I was never working. I never looked at starting my own business as being like, oh, this is great work experience to have that another employer will value. But I, have been offered other job opportunities and things and trips and travel and all kinds of things that I wouldn't have done if I had gone with that traditional path. So without realizing it, like it's sending all these signals to people around me saying, yeah, she is driven, she's resourceful, she'll make it happen. Like she'll stick with something, she's tenacious. Like I'm not doing it for those reasons, but that is so valuable. If your sunk cost kind of thing is all about whether you're going to get, the financial return out of this, or is this going to mean that I am trading, this in for a more traditional, stable prospect in the future? Like it's not. It actually it speaks volumes to people around you when you commit to something that you're passionate about and you work at that when you don't have to, right? Like you don't have to do this podcast. I don't have to run my business. We could both be doing something totally different. But because we are, that says something. So you get a lot more from that, I think, than what people expect.
Have you heard of hidden and observable metrics?
No.
So it's this thing in the mindset space. Chris Williamson popularized it, where basically we trade off hidden metrics such as peace of mind, like sort of inner peace, comfort with what we're doing, for observable metrics such as salary, and almost sometimes like what people are saying to us. So things that are tangible and we can see, we sort of prioritize them over the things that you can't measure with a quantifiable number. That's why people, as soon as they see a big number on a contract, they'll jump at it.
Yeah.
But they don't see the hidden metric, which is peace of mind in the long run. So we trade off these things, but in the long run, we do pay the price for them. Yeah. So I really want to get into these 7 things and we can continue this conversation. And the first one I really like, if you feel lost, design your anti-job. I think there's something powerful about inverting our pain and our fears to showcase what we really want. For me especially, I looked at like the 9-to-5 time restrictions and I was like, no, I don't want that. And I think that was my first thing about wanting to create a flexible job.
Yeah, love that. I love that. Yeah, the anti-dream job idea really comes from like something I've observed in a lot of people that we've worked with, which is that they think that they don't know anything about what they want to do. Like a lot of people genuinely will just feel overwhelmed and like, I don't have any ideas, especially when you're, younger, like 17, 18. You actually already do know a lot because most people have pretty strong opinions about what they don't want. So yeah, I think that can be a nice starting point for people that is a little bit less overwhelming, to really come up with a list of like, okay, design your anti-dream job. Imagine like you're writing up a job description and put in all the tasks or all the things that you wouldn't want to do. It doesn't have to all be related to one real job that's out there. But if it is, I don't want to work a 9-to-5, or I want to be able to have some flexibility in where I work, or I know that I want to be able to do something different every day rather than something sort of the same that happens on repeat. Writing down all of that can then give you a starting point to inverse that, and use ChatGPT to help you too. Like AI is going to be great to help us out with some of these decisions, I think. To flip it and go, okay, well, what does that tell me about what some of my real career values are, the values that I am going to look for and be fulfilled by at work. And I think when we talk about like values and in your personal preferences in work, people think that maybe that's like a selfish thing to do in some ways. Like, oh, if I'm making decisions based on just like what I want, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to like a good job. But what I've found is that a lot of the time when you are in a position where you're doing things that are really aligned with with your needs, you're going to do better in that job. You're going to outperform other people because you're in an environment that's setting you up for success. So I don't think it's a selfish thing really at all. I think it's a smart thing for your career and like your longevity in a career pathway.
I think when people don't want to do a 9 to 5, especially myself, a lot of people, I think, jump to the conclusion that those people are like lazy. They don't want to work hard. They're not committed. They want an easy life. And I think some people wear this 9 to 5 misery as a badge of honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that on like corporate TikTok, like now as well. There's so much content out there about this. I think the 9 to 5 thing, like let's really break that down. It's not that you don't want to work, right? Because even if you won the lotto tomorrow, like most people are still going to want to fill their time with something fulfilling and meaningful that maybe looks like work. You're just not getting paid for it necessarily. Most people don't hate the idea of a 9 to 5. They hate the idea of working a 9 to 5 at something that doesn't fulfill them, doesn't pay them enough, isn't sustainable. So that's really what we're talking about. Like in my own business, I work and have worked way more than a 9 to 5 for a long time. And I love it. Like it's great. And I would have said that too. I still would dread the idea of going into like a corporate kind of gig that's a 9 to 5, but only because that doesn't match my career values. So I think that's what you have to break down is it's not so much that most of us at least hate the idea of working at all. It's just that we want our work to be meaningful to us, I think.
If we're stuck, where should we go? Like if we're reflecting and we're clueless, and I think we look to social media a lot, which can give us the wrong information. It's really hard to navigate these issues, especially in the world of over information. So where would your best advice be to go?
Can I plug my course here?
Of course.
This was a question that I have continuously answered because like there was nothing that I could point people to and be like, hey, this is actually a great place to start if you really have no ideas. So I've been working on this course Unwritten, which the whole idea of that was that most people, like we said, feel that security and stability from like a path that's already been mapped out for you. The hard and scary thing is to look at a blank page and go, okay, like Egan, I want you to map out like what you really want your life to look like. We hardly ever ask people that question. So the idea of approaching that is, overwhelming and people then don't take that leap. So Unwritten is really all about helping you to learn enough about yourself so that you feel confident taking that like unwritten path, if you will. That's like one of our courses that people can do. That is all of my wisdom, if you can call it that, from the last couple of years packed into one course. And it's, great first step.
Number 2, it's hard either way. Choose the fulfilling path. And similar to this whole 9 to 5 thing, it's going to be hard, I think, in this modern world to make a sufficient income, financial freedom, just navigating life struggle. Like there is difficulty. And I think choose your hard is an important framework. It's the whole like something as simple as, okay, unrelated, but me going to an ice bath this morning, right? Yeah. There's the hard of whatever, 4 minutes of discomfort, but then there's the hard of the mental, the hidden metric of that regret. And I think whatever choice we make, we're so quick to look at one side of it and we neglect the other side. And I think especially with that 9 to 5 thing, I think it's an important thing to come back to is being able to actually take a step back and look at the pros and cons of both choices, both pathways. Some people might want to choose the secure path for certain reasons, and that's fine. But I think that's where we need to weave in fulfillment because you're going to spend so much of your life there. I think you've got to integrate some level of congruence between your inner values and what you're actually doing.
I totally agree, and I believe strongly that there's like a happy sort of middle ground for a lot of people where you can have that sort of job security, but also that fulfillment and purpose. Like purpose is a privilege, absolutely, because not everybody. In fact, most people are not going to be in the position where they can be like, cool, I'm going to let go of any other way of making money and just do something because I love it. Like that's not what I'm advocating for, but I think it's that realization that if you are really intrinsically like motivated by what you're doing, you're going to excel at that eventually. Like you are going to be more than happy to put in the 9 to 5 plus hours and invest into that thing and make it great and become great at whatever you're doing. If there is no like inner kind of fulfillment and alignment between you and the work that you're doing, you're going to burn out. Like that is a recipe for burnout. And I think for people that are feeling burnt out by their work right now, that's a big part of it, right? Like it's hard. It's hard to be burnt out, and to be burnt out at like 25, 26 in your career. It's also really hard to take that leap and build up potentially a different pathway for you that is one that you're more passionate about. Both are hard, but one of them you get so much longer term kind of return from at the end of the day, by whether it's your own business or something that, again, those hidden kind of metrics, it's so much more important in the long run. It's like really about short-term versus long-term decisions, I think, too.
I think people get stuck, and myself included, the line between something that is fulfilling and the ingrained cost of just doing hard work being laborious and a chore and etc. I think it's not going to always be you choose a path and it's all roses and it's fun,
Absolutely
it's enjoyable.
Not.
And I think that can get misinterpreted. And I think knowing like when enough's enough, like I think you actually, and this is a point people need to think, is like, where's my line? Like what am I going to accept as bringing me enough fulfillment, enough purpose to justify putting so much time into this career path? And I think when you say choose a fulfilling path, I think that's where you actually really need to deep dive into who you are, because I think it's funny how we leave school and you're asked to pick something for the rest of your life when you know the least about yourself, because action and doing things, that's how you figure out who you are, what you're passionate about. I just think it's really interesting how we're not given enough opportunities to explore ourselves, to make such important decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And I also wanted to add in there, because I think young people now get a lot of attention for being like entitled or like being like lazy at work. Like that is something that comes up a lot in the media still about younger employees. It's not about, it's certainly like choosing a path that you love is not about choosing a path that is easy. I just want to emphasize that too. Like work is work. Like work in itself kind of sucks, right? Like work is always going to be hard. There's always be elements of what I'm doing that I don't love. Like doing my accounting does not fulfill me like intrinsically, and it probably never will, but it's in service of this bigger goal and bigger vision. And the hard thing that I think people look at when they look at a pathway that they're like, this doesn't fulfill me, it's also not in service of, I don't feel like the business I'm in or the role I'm in is making a bigger difference to other people around me or to the world. Like it's not in service of anything. So that's when I think people really struggle. So it's not about not doing hard work. You have to do hard work and you have to be willing to do hard work. It's just about doing the hard work towards something that's going to have a bigger positive impact for you and other people at the end of the day.
Number 3, we work 80,000 hours in a lifetime, invest a few deciding where to put them. Now, this quote from George Mack I really love. He says, you waste years by not being able to waste hours, which is like, if we just spent a few hours figuring out where we're going to put the rest of them, we would save so much time and misery from just figuring out what is probably a more realistic and fulfilling pathway for us.
That is what being purposeful is all about to me, right? I have always been just dumbfounded by like the current way we do career education, which is that you have like one career advisor per 2,000 students in a high school. Like that, just the math of that does not add up. You may be getting 20 minutes with that career advisor who potentially isn't even any good like in your whole kind of high school journey. So I have never understood why we rush young people through kind of those decisions, and people around you might be asking like, what do you want to do, and are well-meaning, but like, as you said, you're in a position in your life where you're the least prepared to know who you are or who you're going to become, more importantly. So I do absolutely think like whether for you that is just a couple hours, like you said, or if it's taking a gap year, if it's taking like some time off and time out just to actually get to know yourself more. And especially if someone is feeling burnt out, you're burnt out after leaving school or from work or studying, like it's impossible to be passionate when you're in a state of burnout. Like they're the total opposite kind of states of being. Like one is like the flame is literally extinguished, right? You've got nothing left in the tank. The other is that you've got so much fuel and motivation to keep going. So if you're feeling burnt out, you literally need to take the time out to replenish that fire. You're not going to be looking at other pathways and going, oh yeah, actually I am passionate about that, because you don't have anything left like in the tank. So I think it's really important, whether that's a couple hours or a couple days, a couple months, ideally, like giving your body that space and time to recover from burnout, and then taking a look at, okay, like what do I actually feel now? Like what things am I just a little bit curious about, or a little bit passionate about, or make me a little bit frustrated or fired up, and thinking of those things as sparks that you need to fuel with like other connections, other people that are like-minded, that are going to help you to grow that little curiosity or little frustration into something bigger. I think, I have a lot of problems with the idea of like find your passion and then everything's okay, because I think most of us have to be a part of like actively curating those passions. It's not like, oh, Egan, your passion is just out there, you just have to work harder to find it. It's like, no, you have to be a part of curating that passion. So yeah, that can be just as little as, listening to like one podcast episode a week, or like spending 10 minutes of your 4 hours on TikTok a day, like making that towards something that might be something you're interested in. You have to start small.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I feel like sometimes action is, I'm taking action, but it's sort of just an excuse and procrastination to have those like difficult inner conversations. Like there's a lot of, if you're sort of a go-getter, someone who likes getting stuff done, you've been conditioned to be a high achiever, to do lots of work, that's your model of success. I think you're conditioned to think all action is created equal. You're conditioned to think that the more you do, eventually you'll find gold. There is a certain power in doing a lot of things. But I read a book that really changed my mindset called Essentialism, and it really highlighted the fact that not all work's created equal, less but more, and figuring out how to take intentional steps. And I think a big one is processing what we go through more, reflecting more. Saying I need to get a lot better at is journaling, that inner introspection within about my thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors, sort of trying to get congruence between them and figure out what best serves me, because it's such a maze we're living in, and I think we don't take a step back to get that bird's eye view to figure out how to escape this maze that we've created for ourselves.
A lot of people don't know where to start with that. I think I always struggle with maybe the idea of self-development and your like self-help kind of gurus, your, I don't know, Tony Robbins, like Gary Vee, like I'm like, I don't relate to those guys. I'm not going to organize every minute of my life to be in service of this purposeful goal that I have, but I can carve out like an hour of my weekend to thinking and reflecting, even if that's just like journaling for a little bit or having a coffee chat with a friend about, those bigger questions. It can be really simple, but yet those actions are so important. I have done that to my own detriment probably sometimes, where I've gone like way too far in that direction and I want everything to be purposeful, and I reflect like maybe too intensely about, the decisions that I'm making. I think there's a balance of like finding whatever that self-reflection kind of tool is for you. A lot of people, journaling is maybe not the right way to go. For me, it is. I feel like journaling is like magical, and if you're really trying to sort through something, really helps. Other people, it might be, like talking with some friends about it. It might be watching like some videos or listening to a podcast, like whatever tool that helps you to reflect, like run with that. Some people, it's astrology, like there's so many, reading your horoscope. Like if that's a reflection tool for you, then use it. Find what works for you and try to integrate that more into your day-to-day. Knowing that, like, for example, in the last kind of 12 to 18 months for Purposeful, we've had some of those more, I guess, observable metrics, like that have been amazing, like been really successful in terms of like partnerships we've gotten and the financial value of those. But I probably did the least amount of work, to be quite honest with you, in the last 18 months. I just was really strategic about going, this is going to be the decision or the action that's going to have the most impact, the most kind of exponential impact on what is possible for Purposeful. And I just did those. It's like work smarter, not harder sort of thing. Like you don't need to overcook this stuff for it to be effective.
I think in this hustle mentality, like we wear burnout as a badge of honor.
Yep.
And similar to that 9 to 5 misery, I think there's, I feel like some people, including myself, I'm like, if I'm not struggling, I'm not doing something right. Or like if I'm not feeling burnt out or I'm not feeling like it's hard, because all the information you consume on the internet is like, you got to grind. But I look back at all the action I've taken and I look and I see the biggest steps I took were when I actually took a step back and I started heading in the right direction. But it's really hard to pull yourself out. And the reason it is because we're always stuck in this middle ground, right? Yeah. We're always stuck in, it's good, but it's not that great. Yeah. It's not that bad. It's not shit. Sometimes pain is actually really good for leveling us and taking us out and forcing us to take action. In psychology, it's called the region beta paradox, right? Where I think that applies to a lot of people in this space is we're just in our jobs they're okay.
It's okay.
They're okay.
And look, for me, like those catalysts have almost always been my physical health, because I kind of at the time didn't feel that way, but I'm kind of grateful that I'm very sensitive to burnout. Like I just cannot function when I burn out. So I have to take that step back or else I just, cannot function, need to physically recover as much as you might mentally. So my body is the thing that, reminds me and forces me to stop a lot of the time. And that was what happened when I was 18, was physically burnt out. Like I couldn't live life like a normal uni student. I had to take that step back. And that wasn't purposeful. It was reactive, right? So my question with like the business was always, how can I proactively help people find purpose without it having the catalyst having to be a major health crisis or issue? Can we like integrate things and spark like those moments of realization for people a bit more proactively? I don't know. It's a bit of both. Sometimes there's a reason why like really significant life events, like if you lose a loved one or someone important to you, or losing a job or something like potentially like terrible happening, is the thing that then catalyzes you to change. I think what I want people to think about is that you don't have to wait for those moments as well for permission to do things differently. Like it applies to your career, but it also applies to like your relationships. You can be in a friendship or romantic relationship and it can be just okay as well, but maybe not really like aligned with who you are. That can be an okay reason to change course. And especially in your career, like 9 times out of 10, you can make a decision and you can try it out. And if it's the wrong thing for you, you can turn back around and go back to where you were. Like most of the time, those decisions are not permanent. Like they're just not. But we fear that they are, I think. So we put
100%.
more weight on them.
Number 4, which sort of segues nicely, is knowing what you really want from life is a muscle that you need to build. The more you use your muscle, the easier it becomes to make decisions. I feel like more when I've gone into this space of self-reflection, journaling, it just becomes a lot easier when you understand yourself a bit more. Yep. I feel like it's this lens I see the world through, because I know I have values now. I know what I stand for. I sort of have a vision of where I want to take my life. Whenever I'm faced with decisions and I have to make choices, like I can see there's a lot of clarity around the butterfly effect of making choices, because I know what I want and where I want to go. But it's when we have that uncertainty and unassuredness about who we are, like it's really hard to decipher like what's the best option.
Yeah. I love that. I did this exercise that really shifted my perspective on this, which was literally just getting like a piece of paper and on 4 lines kind of do the first 5 years of your life, then the next 5 and so on to however old you are now. And just in each like box, write down a couple words to describe what you think you were like at those ages, like how you would have defined yourself around those times. And like did this exercise and realized really quickly that from ages like 15 to 18, before that, I knew a lot about myself. Like I kind of see that that version of Elizabeth as being like, yeah, she knew who she was. She was confident. Like she didn't think twice about any of that. And then something happens when we kind of turn 14, 15 that a lot of us just blank and stop trusting ourselves, I think, and trusting that we do know who we are, and thinking like we have to study ourselves as though like we're like this foreign kind of thing. Like, but you are you, like you do know who you are. We just kind of go through that process, I think, in high school of suddenly like thinking about conforming with other people and putting so much weight on other people's expectations that we have to unlearn those behaviors a little bit. So it's really an amazing starting point is just coming back to when is the last time that you do remember being really like fulfilled by what you were doing? You know, who were you with? Like, what were you doing? What were you working towards? When's the last time that you do really remember being really like frustrated or fired up about something? Thinking back and using those as a starting point, like by retracing your steps almost, is really powerful. And you have to practice. Like I always say with the gym analogy, you don't go to the gym once and then expect to have a 6-pack of abs like the next day. It's just, or to be able to run a marathon. Maybe some people do, but like it doesn't work like that. The same thing goes with developing like a growth mindset, with building up that kind of decision-making muscle of, okay, what is right for me? Like, what are my values? You just have to practice. And it could be just taking 5 minutes like on the bus or train home from school or work to think about what's like something that I would love to add to my bucket list. The bucket list is something that an activity I think people get. It's easy to conceptualize and it's something that scares a lot of people too. But even just coming back to that kind of question or that sort of reflection, very simply, a couple of minutes in a day has a huge impact over time. So much so that now, like when I, at the start of every year, like pull out my goals and like set my kind of vision for the year ahead, it's all the same kind of goals because I've gotten so good at knowing what I want. But when I first started that activity, it took me ages to make a list. Like challenging myself to write down like 30 goals just seemed extreme and insane. Whereas now it's like, no, I know all these things that I want to do. And as you say, when it comes to making decisions, you're just building that intuition muscle.
100%. Anxiety comes from this perceived threat, that we're not capable of dealing with something in the future. I feel like throughout high school, the stakes get larger, but our skills to combat those perceived stakes don't grow in alignment with them. There's not personal development skills or workshops in high school. We're not learning these introspective skills. So while the stakes get higher, we don't grow probably in conjunction with that, which is probably why there's so much anxiety and people lose themselves in this whole process, which is where like things like what you're doing are incredible for bridging that gap, but there's not enough on it. Like that's where people have to be proactive and hear these things, listen to other people and really be proactive to take steps towards it. Like I said, it all comes back to the people who need to hear this the most won't until pain hits them, and then they're like, oh, I really need to do the work. I need to figure myself out, which is sad, but trying to the whole podcast I've been trying to figure out how can I best motivate someone to take action when they probably need it the most, but they don't realize they need it the most. They're ignorant to it, but it's really hard to show them it and make them aware of it. So it's still a conundrum in any space, in any business, in anything in life.
Any personal situation, right, where you know what someone needs or you think you know what someone needs, but they're just not ready to hear it or like to take on that advice. I struggle with that a lot too. But I think in my own story, when I was in year 10, I went on this leadership conference that everybody had talked about. They're like, this will change your life. It was run in LA by this guy who's literally a celebrity dentist. He's like on the Doctors, like all those like Beverly Hills kind of shows where he literally does the cosmetic dentistry for A-listers. And he brings together all of his clients for a week to come and talk to young people about like how you became successful. It was the first kind of taster I'd ever had into personal development. Didn't really know that was a thing until that point. And I remember during the conference, I was like, this is good, but it's not great. Like I don't feel my life changing like as I sit here and listen to these talks. And it wasn't until a couple years later when I finished high school and had that catalyst moment of being burnt out that everything that I'd learned from that conference kind of came rushing in, and I realized now I do have this mindset that is very different to other young people. So I really tried to not undervalue the like long-term impact that you're going to have. That you're not, when I'm working with year 10s, year 10s are tricky to work with. If you've ever like done any public speaking for year 10s, most of them are not ready to hear it, but most of them will remember me when they get to a career or study decision, because we were the first people that kind of got to lay the groundwork for the mindset that they have about their careers. And you think about that literally, whether that's with your mental health or physical health or all kinds of advice, that you're keeping it on the back burner until the situation comes up and then you really need it. And that's what you think of. So I think that's really important to remember.
Number 5, choosing a career that aligns with your core values is more rewarding than chasing wealth or passion. Now, 2 parts of this. There's the figuring out what your core values are, but I'm interested in mostly why you don't think we should pursue our passion.
I think the thing about passion is it's a feeling, right? So feelings come and they go. Like feelings are not like a permanent state of you're not always going to be passionate about the same thing necessarily. And I think people chase after passion too much because they think, oh, like it should be obvious what I'm passionate about, right? It should be this big, intense emotion that, for a lot of people, we think about passions more traditionally like sport or like what you're good at as well, kind of being synonymous with passion. And for me personally, I found that unhelpful because I didn't think that I had one. Like I said earlier, it's something that I think you have to curate and grow over time. It starts off small for a lot of us. It's not like a lightning bolt moment where this is what I'm passionate about. It is like a little spark. So you have to give it fuel to grow. But also in terms of my career, like, yes, I am passionate about what I do, but it's taken me, 5 or 6 years to get to a position that when I started, I thought would take me like 12 to 18 months. Passion is not like there for you in the long run. It ebbs and it flows. Like there have been so many times, we're talking like months, if not years as part of my journey where I've still believed in the vision that I'm working towards, but I've lost some of that passion for different reasons. And if I just relied on, am I wholly passionate about this right in this moment? Like there are times when I absolutely would have quit. So I think that's where that hard work piece comes in, right? That there are going to be unfulfilling parts of working towards an ultimately fulfilling goal, always. So, and same goes in think about like a long-term relationship. Like most people who've been, say, married for like 20 or 30 years, they've not been passionate like every single day of their marriage, right? Like we don't look at like passion or happiness necessarily as the ultimate success metric. Fulfillment is much more important. And that is where your core values come in, because being in a state of like balance to me is usually about all your core values being aligned. And if you think about any situation in your life where there has been like intense conflict or just like something has really not felt right, most of the time that's because your core values were either being actively like challenged by someone or something, or if you were feeling bored and just not motivated, they probably weren't being fulfilled, right? So when you're in a state of balance of like that inner peace, it's usually because your core values are being met and fulfilled. It's not just that they're not being challenged, like you're actually being able to realize them in practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we look for passion to steer the ship, but a better captain would be our core values, right? Yeah. I feel like, with passion, like it really does ebb and flow. But I feel like with passion, I feel like a lot of people are passionate sometimes just about what they're good at.
Yes.
And then they realize in the long run, they don't actually have true intrinsic motivation or alignment with what they're doing. It sort of stems from the validation of what they're doing. It happens a lot in sporting contexts. But then what's the link between value and passion? Do you feel like passion grows from something you value when you start to see reward from it? I know that when I've reflected on the podcast, when I look to my values more than whether I'm passionate about it, it puts me in a lot more of a grounded mindset to stay consistent, disciplined, resilient, fulfilled, rather than like chasing almost the highs with the passion.
Yeah. I had a piece of advice once that was like, business journey, you know, that is going to be a roller coaster. So what you need is to find people around you that can, instead of, you know, celebrating with you when like you're at the highest kind of point and commiserating at the lowest point, the people that are going to keep you more stable. Because yeah, look, it happens all the time where if you work towards that high, and then that might be the passion or being able to just do what you're passionate about, like you're always going to encounter then like a new set of challenges. That basically is business in a nutshell. Is you solve one problem only to get like 5 bigger problems that you didn't realize were something you had to think about. So that's why for me it's more about prioritizing values, prioritizing that long-term like alignment and balance is the best chance of setting yourself up for success and pursuing something over time. I do think the romantic relationship side is a good analogy with this, because it's like you might have like something that like feels really passionate, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the thing in the long run too, right? You want that long-term compatibility between you and the work that you do, hopefully, and the what exactly, how that is expressed in terms of what job might change, but the values should stay pretty steady and constant.
There's a really deep conversation that can be had about why opposites attract. I'm not sure how it relates to jobs, but I know in like relationship stuff, like sometimes we try and bond to opposites because we're trying to heal this inner child wound, which is why we can be so attracted to something, because our central nervous system feels at peace with the discomfort that they give us. Yeah. So that's why when we talk about toxic relationships, I wonder how that transfers to work. I think it does. I actually do think it plays a part in terms of like, that's sort of what I meant by saying that you can have situations that are really challenging your values. Like if you're not going to get on well with someone who has values that are actually not just opposite to yours, but like at conflict with your values, that's not going to work. But you should and like can surround yourself with people that have different values to you, but ones that are like complementary, and you know, like that is okay in the long run. I think you're just trying to not put yourself always in situations where things are like really at odds, because that's going to burn you out. What about surrounding ourselves with people who have different opinions? How do values and opinions link? I'm curious there.
It's definitely like this comes up a lot, probably like in politics, right? Where people are like, oh, can you like be around people that have different like values? Absolutely, yes. I think sometimes when you're around people that have really conflicting kind of values with you, it does then challenge us to reflect in different ways, right? And that can be a positive thing, probably in like shorter bursts. But when we're talking about like long-term work environment or your friendship circle, like you're going to be in a better position over time with people that complement your values. So I think like values and beliefs are different. That's probably like a whole episode in itself. But yeah, your core values, we all have them, whether you're aware already of them or not. Your values tend to stay pretty steady, I think, like over time, whereas your beliefs can and should change a lot more often. You should be open to new and challenging perspectives. And when those things are not aligned, also leads to a lot of cognitive dissonance probably too.
I feel like we get stuck in the middle ground a lot, obviously due to the fear and anxiety we have around going outside of our comfort zone. But my whole thing about going outside your comfort zone is it tests you. And with that test comes clarity of like where you're at. Like I feel like because it's like we're sitting on the sidelines and wondering why we're not winning the game.
Literally, and that maybe is one of our next points about like experimenting and exploring. Like I do think that most of the answers that people are looking for in terms of like what do I really want, you're going to find from movement. Like you're not going to find from staying still and being static. And I think I have always, because of like early experiences that I had, really understood that, okay, but like I'm not going to, unless I change my behaviors, I'm not going to see change in the outcomes that I want either. Like if I am spending all this time ruminating about the right career, but I'm not going out and trying anything, like the only data that I have to work with right now is what's already in my head, which is pretty limited, and what I think I feel about that hypothetically. You need to go out and get more data so you can make better decisions. That's really where like this idea of career experimenting, I think, comes in, because it's about going, okay, these are my assumptions about like this pathway or this decision. I think I'm going to make this much money. I think I'm going to have to study for this long. I think this is what I'm going to love the most about this path. And then go out and challenge that, because the problem is that most people don't do that. And that's why like I see young people that have decided on like their path in year 11 or 12 based on assumptions, or they assumed about that pathway, go into a study pathway, and then don't come out the other side of it for another 5, 6, 7 years and realize their assumptions were wrong. Like it wasn't actually what they thought it was going to be. So you can't avoid that completely, but you can test it, right? And you should test it.
Number 6, most decisions are reversible. Make them while taking action. I think a lot of us sit on the sidelines, myself included at times. It's like we want to have the perfect answer, but we only figure out that like the optimal answer once we have enough data points to make choices. But I think it's our fear around like choosing the wrong thing, what that means about us, and the consequences of our choices that makes us scared to take them. But I think I think that's where you need to tap into courage. Like I have had to do that a lot, and I think when I look at people's stories that I've interviewed, it's like this integral component of their stories is courage, because there wasn't answers, but they had that leap of faith. They had that trust within themselves that something was better. They deserved better. And then from there, they had such a great perspective of what truly fulfilled them.
Yeah. Oh, look, I agree, but also I have equally struggled with that too. You know, we do get set in our ways. Like I think knowing, like being human is knowing that we love like our routines, we love our certainty, we love our patterns. So it's human to kind of get stuck in a situation sometimes. And yeah, like recently I've got some travel coming up. I was telling you about, I haven't gone traveling for like 5 years, so since pre-COVID, and have had like some health issues and different things going on. That has meant there's like quite a lot of like ambiguity around that decision for me. It's like I've been able to get to a point where I work for myself. I control a lot of what I do, even though it fulfills me. I've recognized areas where I've gotten comfortable as well. And so I know that this experience is going to be really transformative to me, not because travel in itself, you don't need to travel to have those kind of life changing and mindset shifting experiences, but I know it's going to push me way out of my comfort zone that I've kind of established over the last couple years. And I'm scared of that, but I know it's a good thing. Like I know that every time, you know, you embrace that scary kind of space in yourself, it's going to lead to a better thing. And I was reflecting on this the other day too, where I was driving past like my old school, and I used to be really scared of like needles when I was little, right? Like most of us, right? The idea of getting like a flu vaccine or whatever was really scary. And I was like driving past a place that I remember like I needed to get these like vaccinations. I hadn't gone, and I was so nervous about it. And I was like, far out. Like that was like the thing that I was so terrified of back then. Like 12 years later, it's just, you know, it's not something that I'm even concerned about by any means. But I think just realizing that if you're here, you've survived all of those things that you were scared of before. Like you can do it again. You will do it again. That is human as well. Yeah, but not to shame yourself for having those uncertainties and feeling scared. It's okay. That is also part of being human.
I don't know if you've seen much of this, but I think one of the dark sides of self-improvement that I've had to figure out is self-acceptance. Like because once you become aware, this bloke put this post on, his name's Caleb, and he worded it so well, but like once you become aware of what you need to be doing, it becomes ammunition that you use against yourself. And I've struggled a lot with that, and I've gotten better at it. But it's still, I think, something I'm figuring out how to deal with. I'm really good at self-improvement. Like I'm very, very good, but self-acceptance is a space I'm recently exploring and still figuring out how to do.
Yeah, and I absolutely two things on that. I think with your values, every core value that you have has like a shadow value. So for me, like authenticity is one of my core values. But like being authentic or being like becoming obsessive about like I always need to be making decisions that are authentic, like that is a source of a lot of anxieties for me as well when I reflect on that. Like is just worrying like, is this the most authentic choice for me? So there's always like a light and dark side, I think, to most of your core values or the things that are really true about you, as you say, that you discover through like that self-awareness. And yeah, showing that like self-compassion. I am a purposeful perfectionist, and I think that's where my like perfectionist tendencies from school really transferred over to this self-development space, and it became about doing things in a purposeful way, but being perfect at those purposeful things. So I don't care so much about things that don't I don't consider to be purposeful. I won't like need to be perfect in, but the things I do care about, I want to be perfect in. So I know that about myself, and I know I have to mitigate it and balance it. And have that kindness to yourself too. Have people around you that remind you of that. That's why I don't really like hustle culture for that reason too, because it's not purposeful, right? Like self-development for the sake of it and just to like have a crazy perfect routine and be smashing goals all the time, like it's never been right for me. It's not sustainable, I think, for most people either. So you got to find that balance that works for you. It's self-development is going to help everybody, but not like we don't all have to be Tony Robbins, you know?
I really like this shadow thing, especially with values. It's really interesting conversation because I feel like if we look at our core values as being like a guiding light, like our lighthouse example, I feel like there's a dark side to it. Like if I look at my top 4 values, probably number one of them being like authenticity, right? Then the dark side of that is this fear that I've had where I've conformed and I've spent a lot of time like not being myself. And it's like, it's this whole carrot and stick thing, right? Like, I feel like values, we look at values like they're a carrot, like they're pushing us to this ideal version of ourselves. But I wonder how many of our values are made from this stick, pushing away from the fears that we hold. It's interesting because it's like, are our values truly authentic, or do they stem from fear? Does that matter?
I know, but I do. Yeah, I think that we can have. Everybody has values, like I said, but your values are informed. Sometimes it maybe is just like predetermined, but a lot of the time it's socialized. It's from your culture, from your family, from the people that you've looked up to. Like that's where they come from a lot of the time. So it's worth taking a hard look at like what are my values and are these really the best values for me to have? But I think at the same time, look, purpose is also one of my core values. And for me, that expresses itself in being like a why person. Like I need to know why I'm doing something. If you want to get the most out of me, you need to like give me the why, and then I can get on board. But I've seen myself, like I did have a job at one point where the boss that I was working for, like he was very different to me in that sense. He didn't explain, like he never explained the context. I was like, I need that. Otherwise I'm really going to struggle, to the point of it being kind of detrimental and annoying sometimes. Like you shouldn't always question why in everything because you'll never get anything done. So I think like exploring the light and kind of dark side of your values is a good thing to be aware of, so that when you're making new choices, you can see that as a bias in itself. And yes, most of the time it's going to lead to like more long-term fulfillment or a positive kind of outcome, but it's also how you're biased to looking at the situation. So I had like a couple opportunities come up recently where my initial value response was like, no, this isn't purposeful enough, or this isn't authentic enough. And I had to put that aside for a second, also try to look at it from other perspectives too, to find a bit more of a balanced middle ground.
I wonder how much of it is there a right answer, or do we just create a story that makes it the right answer?
Because a bit of both.
The whole power of self-talk and like constructing a story is like, is so big in this space. Like, you can go through the exact experience and the things you tell yourself, and it's all interlinked with your values and stuff. It's fascinating. It's a bit of a rabbit hole because, like, sometimes I get a bit confused. It's like, I know my values, I know what I stand for, but sometimes there's a trade-off between certain choices that I could justify either way. Like, I could make a rational argument for this choice and that choice, and the story I tell myself matters. And it's like, depending on the consequences will be whether that choice was justified. Yeah. And it's like, there probably isn't a right answer. And I feel like, and this is one thing I hate about this space that needs to be improved, is I think we think, and I have thought this, there's always an optimal answer, but you're not going to know so much of the time. Like, you're only going to realize in hindsight what was probably a better choice. And sometimes it's not binary, right? Like, it's
never binary. It never is. And that's the thing. Like, I literally have a choice I'm trying to make at the moment. And one of the biggest things that I've reflected on is, like, both are good choice, like both are good paths. Like, there's not a wrong decision here. And I think we like to make things binary. Like, we like to think that, there is the right one and the wrong one. And most of the time that there isn't. They're just different pathways that you can take. You're going to learn something or get something from different options. There's not necessarily like one being like this evil, terrible option to pick. I think I also really subscribe to this idea of beginning again, like has come up a lot like for me lately, and this idea of like burning down kind of your idea of self and rebuilding, and like that being just a really natural part of life. Like, we like to think, okay, cool, I'm making one career decision, I'm going to do this for 50 years. Like, no, you're probably not. Like, that's not actually going to be how that plays out in practice. You want to pick like one partner and, be with someone forever. Like, but in reality, that doesn't happen a lot of the time now. Like, it's more natural to evolve and see yourself as evolving too. So I think that a lot of the stress that people have about making the right decision comes from the difference between what they expect and what the reality is, and just seeing things as being less permanent. I guess the impermanence of life. Like, you can always begin again. Sometimes there's big consequences to beginning again, but always being willing to try is the way to be fulfilled, I think.
Gareth talked a lot about detachment, and I thought that was powerful. I think we get very attached to the things we're doing.
Yeah.
But when you look deep within those things, it's like you got to look at the core value. I think we look at the wrong things. Like, we look at our goals and our achievements, but the underlying things beneath them is what we should extract from our choices and our behaviors and our actions, and that's what we should. I think we're so easy to identify with the observable metrics, the socially acceptable metrics of success, but it takes a certain mindset and skills that are taught to figure out these things.
I do just quickly want to add on that, like, that's why I really love like beginning again right now, because I thought in the first kind of 5-6 years of my career, I was like, I've worked out this purposeful way of doing work and life. Like, I'm sorted, and have lots of things have happened lately that forced me to completely reevaluate that. And I just had this wariness of like, do I really have to do this again? Like, do I really have to really reset my mindset and relearn who I am and what I want, like, over and over again? But that in truth is life. Like, that is life. And the more that we can embrace that, and embrace those changes with courage, as you say, and like compassion, the better off that we're going to be.
And I do think, although beginning again, there are a lot of things that restart and reset. There is a lot of timeless lessons and skills in the toolkit that accompany that make it easier. And with starting again, there's like this blank canvas, and there's freedom, there's creativity, there's an authenticity attached to it.
You're not actually starting from scratch, right? I think that you mentioned earlier about, in high school we make those choices and we don't have any experience to make them really, but like when 25, like I've got 10 years of experience now of trying to make decisions and get better at it as I go. So even if you're reflecting and renewing like the what that you do and what your life looks like, and where you live, who you surround yourself with, like, you're not losing those lessons that you've learned. It's a muscle. You get to keep the muscle, thankfully, to take with you to new situations too.
it's like a video game when you're trying to pass a level and you fail at a certain point, then you get to restart and you remember all the intricacies of the map, and you sort of know when the obstacles that are going to come, and there's an awareness around it, and then you have the skills to combat it. I think it's a good analogy. The last one, number 7, your future job may not exist. Now, around half of the jobs available now didn't exist 10 years ago, which just means it's a constantly evolving workspace. The job that I am currently about to start, like some of these things just we're not aware of, like the whole landscape's changing, and I think you've got to tap. I think because that brings uncertainty and sometimes almost alarms people. That's where personal development, investment into skills, these are timeless things that can hold you in good stead regardless of the specifics of the job that you may have.
Yeah, and just like we were saying with building that mindset muscle, same goes for your career experience. Most people get pretty confused or just don't know how to approach that statistic of 50% of jobs don't exist. We're going to have as many as 7 or 8 different careers in our lifetime, not different jobs, but careers. Like that's pretty hard to comprehend, but really all that it means is that you are also going to have an active role to play in creating those jobs and creating those new career opportunities for yourself that blend your skill set, your passions, your goals in unique ways, as well as what is in demand, what industry needs. There will definitely be things that are constant about that, and that one are those kind of mindset oriented soft skills. But in addition to that, there are some things you can more practically invest in, and like tech, even though some of us might be apprehensive about it, like is here to stay. Obviously, we are all going to need those digital literacy skills, and that doesn't just mean being like digitally literate because you're on social media a lot. Like you don't need to learn how to code, but you do need to know how to work with technology, how to read and like understand data and use data. Like those are things that are a pretty safe bet to go. It's going to help you no matter what you go in, no matter what direction you go in. So if you're feeling like you need some of that stability, invest in developing some tech skills. Any tech skills is going to put you in a better position than most other people. But yeah, the mindset is far more important.
And I would say also my recommendation is like with tech, we have, because there's going to be such a reliance and a focus on tech, that also means there's going to be less people investing in the emotional intelligence space and these hard, important core human skills. So if you can level up in this space, like it's going to keep you apart. It's almost like when you had tech skills, whatever, 10 years ago, that was like a differentiating factor. Now it's like being a good human and understanding yourself fully is going to be something that sets you apart, which is interesting because we're going to have such a focus on technology.
You need a bit of both, and I like kind of dabbled in the no code space. I was building apps and all kinds of cool things. I would not consider myself to be like a techie person, but all you actually have to know is like what's out there and what it can do. You don't necessarily need to know how to do it. You just need to know what it can do so that you can use it in a creative way. So suddenly like understanding the different tools and things that were out there allowed me to get creative with the business and go, oh, like I know this, and this is out there. So this opens up a whole new world of different solutions that we could create or things that could reach people. I don't have to be the one that builds it, but if you kind of are aware of, some of the new technology and what it can do, it's a different kind of toolkit that you then have to solve problems in a better way and combine those human skills, see those real problems and challenges that exist and combine them with, more innovative ways of solving them.
Anything else to touch on before we wrap it up?
Anything else? No, I love what you're doing. I think my biggest piece of advice for people that are listening, this stuff can be really overwhelming. That is the number one kind of constant that I've seen when working with young people about career choices. But you absolutely have to start somewhere, and figuring out if there's just one part of this conversation that works for you, that makes sense with you, that resonates, then just try that. Like you don't have to, being purposeful does not look like copying everything that I've said or do. It's about working out what is aligned for you and find your core values.
Totally. My my thing on this would just be do it for future you. I think that's a massive important thing. The more I keep that in mind, the more I'm able to go through a bit of discomfort now and embrace that. Every time in the future I receive the benefits of a younger version of myself, I feel grateful for myself. So it's keeping that in your self-awareness is massive.
It's an investment.
Definitely. Well, thanks for your time, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys, for listening.